state, you are in the right place. And we're just waiting for one more panelist to make her way up to the stage. No, I don't have any either.
What happens when the smog goes away in California?
The swamp?
The smog.
Oh, the smog. What?
UCLA.
Ah. All right. Well, I guess we'll get started, and hopefully our last panelist will arrive shortly. Hi, everybody. My name is Nina Ignazik. I am the founder and editor of Planet Detroit. We are a nonprofit local newsroom founded in 2019, and we cover climate, public health, environmental issues that impact Detroiters and impact people in Michigan. And here's our panelist, Rukia. All right. I'll let her get settled, and we'll start this way. I'll let each of the panelists introduce themselves. You want to start, Lisa?
Sure. My name's Lisa John Rogers. I'm the news editor at Great Lakes Now. We are a monthly show produced out of Detroit PBS, but we are syndicated region-wide in the US and Canada, and I run the web magazine associated with the show. Happy to be here. Thanks, Nina.
Yeah, thanks for coming. All right.
Hello, I am Sherry McWhirter. I'm an environment reporter at MLive. Our flagship is the Grand Rapids Press, and my beat is covering climate, biodiversity, and the energy transition. Happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks for coming.
You bet.
Hello, I'm Jenna Brooker. I'm an environmental and food reporter for Bridge Detroit, and was Planet Detroit's first intern. And this isn't necessarily relevant, but I will add that I was a manager of the campus farm here, and they've got the farm stand out there that you guys probably passed. They got discounted produce for students, so check that out today.
All right.
Hey everyone, my name is Rukia Colvin. I use they and them pronouns. I'm a freelance journalist, but I actually got my start in journalism through Planet Detroit, which is exciting for me, but I also pride myself in interweaving my organizing work into my journalism. So just wanted to add that as well.
All right. So thanks to all of you for coming today. We're going to talk about what you all do today. When I emailed everybody for this panel, I called it the Climate Journalism Panel of Awesomeness, because we are all of you are doing such great work. All right, so the first question is, and by the way, if anybody has any questions, just like raise your hand and get my attention. I know it's a big room, but it's a pretty small group, so I think we can just kind of be somewhat informal. What role does journalism play in addressing local climate issues? And I know this has evolved a lot in the last maybe 5 years. Things have changed. And Sherry, I think you probably have the longest experience of anybody on the panel. What have you seen change over the past 5-10 years when it comes to covering climate in the media?
Well, there's coverage now.
Right.
That's a good change. I was hired to be a climate reporter in 2021, and there's a scientific group at the University of Colorado Boulder who monitors climate coverage worldwide, and they say that 2021 was the peak of climate coverage worldwide. We've slipped a little in the last couple of years, but they say that we're still covering climate more than we did in the 17 years prior to that high point. But local coverage of climate change, I think, is the new bread and butter of the subject. I'm not competing with the New York Times. I'm trying to get the message to the readers here in Michigan. When they hired me at MLive, they said, we want you to explain to Michiganders how climate change is already impacting their lives. So local news is the way to do it.
Because local people need to care about what's going on, not close to them. Rukia, so you mentioned that you are kind of interweaving your organizing leanings with your journalism leanings. How do you do that, and what do you see in terms of climate and media?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. So for me, how I even got into journalism was because I was getting into sort of some writing in an organizing sense of working with a group of folks who were organizing against the Lantis auto plant on Detroit's east side as they were advocating for community benefits they felt were more vital to have versus what this corporate entity in the city believed that they should have. So it was through this group of people who were very hyper local focused in Detroit, who had already been doing the work for years, right? Who were doing the work but didn't necessarily have attention brought to the work that they were doing. So that's how I founded this newsletter called the Solutionaries Collective to get that information out to neighborhoods. And then that's what led me into doing a fellowship with Planet Detroit. So I see it's a matter of sort of archiving and documenting what has already been happening and uplifting the stories of the people who have been doing the work. I also got started in environmental journalism in 2021, and when I learned that Planet Detroit was the first environmental focused publication around, I was surprised because, I mean, it's the fact that this stuff happened, environmental injustice has been happening for decades, centuries even, to Black and brown communities. The work has already been done. It's just a matter of documenting it. So that's what I see, like organizing, tying that journalism into, just connecting the two.
Yeah. And so, Jenna, I know that in your report, did you also start in 2021?
I think I started in 2019 as Planet Detroit's first intern, and then I was also a Midwest reporting fellow for GRIST.
Right, right. So you've also focused a lot on grassroots groups and kind of documenting what they're doing and sort of centering their voices. Can you talk a little bit about what that's looked like and how that's evolved in your reporting?
Yeah, I think that's really important. Hopefully all of us know that climate change is disproportionately impacting Black and brown communities and low-income communities. And Detroit is 80% Black, and I don't know the poverty statistics, but it's bad. So I think I really try and uplift how climate change is disproportionately impacting those residents in terms of like extreme heat and flooding and a myriad of other issues. And the grassroots organizations, like the ones that Rukia is involved in, and their solutions and what they're doing to advocate for their communities.
All right. And Lisa, so you work for Detroit Public Television, Great Lakes Now, and so you cover all over the Great Lakes. What do you see in terms of Great Lakes-wide climate issues that journalism is making a difference in covering and kind of getting the word out?
I think PFAS is
PFAS?
PFAS is maybe like the top thing that I think is in terms of in relation to the lakes and fresh water. But I think when it comes to Great Lakes Now, I think we're a regional initiative, right? So we kind of think of ourselves as a hub, and we always kind of joke that everywhere is downstream from somewhere else. And so we hope that maybe there's a reader or a viewer in Ohio who might be reading a story about nutrient pollution or PFAS or flooding, something that's happening in Michigan or somewhere else, and either if they're experiencing those downstream effects or maybe they're experiencing something similar, they can see like what's working there. Can we kind of advocate for something similar over here so that we can kind of take these very hyper-local issues, have them in one place, and then people can kind of zoom out to see what's the larger thing at play. What's going on? Do we need to, in Indiana, protect our wetlands more? Yes, is the answer to that. But, Michigan and Minnesota and New York, they're doing great in terms of wetland protection. So we kind of think of ourselves as a place where people can compared to Indiana and Illinois.
Okay,
Yes.
see, I didn't know that, but that's why I need to watch more Great Lakes Now and read the website.
It helps to be able to kind of compare and contrast.
Right,
I
yeah,
think.
exactly. Okay, great. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about community engagement. So this is something that is sort of become more of an issue and a tactic in journalism. I think that, you know, prior to a lot of us, you know, up here on the stage, kind of the old school journalism, there was a lot less of it. It was more like people reporting and giving you the news, and then maybe there were some comments online, and maybe people wrote some letters to the editor, but that was kind of the extent of it. So how do you, in your work, understand who your audiences are, understand what their questions are, and connect with them both, you know, before you identify the stories, in the process of reporting, and then afterwards? Anybody want to go?
Yeah, well, Great Lakes Now, we do a lot of live events, and we've noticed that through these live events that are on Facebook and YouTube, we've been able to like directly connect with a lot of our audience, and it's been really fascinating to see. You know, we did one that was about a larger project that we're a part of called The Checkup, which is a part of a Great Lakes News Collaborative that we're a part of, and we were kind of looking into climate change and health in the region. And it was kind of fascinating to see people commenting saying like, yeah, my asthma has gotten a lot worse since the wildfires started, or yeah, I live in an area where like a lot of my family members are being diagnosed with cancer, and, you know, kind of having people be able to like engage with our content in real time, like that's been kind of a very beautiful thing to witness.
Anybody else want to add?
I mean, I feel like I'm just on the ground and in the community every single day, going to block club meetings, like neighborhood association meetings, just social events, just being around. I collaborate with a lot of different people. My specific newsroom hosts a number of events where we go into the community and the community can come to our office and we can meet people and take questions. And I've gotten a number of stories like that, and we have probably like 5 of those a year. So I think community engagement is like essential to journalism and like serving readers. And so that's like my number one priority, is collaborating with residents to help tell the stories that they want to tell and get them the information that they're looking for.
I think I'd probably answer a little differently, framing a little different. When I'm trying to tell a climate story, I have discovered that the raw science alone is not enough to get people to pay attention. A couple years back, I wrote a story. I thought it was a fascinating white paper. These researchers were collecting the carcasses of birds that had died after slamming into skyscrapers in Chicago. And they looked at data also from some researchers in the Amazon who were netting birds. Mm-hmm. And they were able to determine that the body shape and wing length of birds were changing because of climate change. My head exploded. I was like, wow, that's incredible. I wrote this story, and I couldn't get but a few hundred people to read it in terms of page views. Nobody cared. But when I put on galoshes and I hiked into a prairie fen with a scientist and observed her looking for a little endangered butterfly that's on the brink of extinction, and I was able to get a picture of that butterfly myself and tell the story of this scientist, that story resonated with people.
Right.
So it's not, I hate to say it, it's not the science alone. I wish it were. It's got to be the people. We've got to tell the stories of how people are interacting with their environment, how people are responding to climate change. So the best way for us up here to tell the story of climate change is with all of you. We need all of you. We need the scientists. We need the community action agents. We need the nonprofit organizations. we can't do this without you because nobody cares about just the science. I wish they did.
Some people care about the birds.
We do. I bet everybody in this room cares about the birds. There's not that many bird stories.
I know, I'm
but
gonna read that story now.
But to get the widespread audience, the people at large, to care about this kind of thing, they want a personal connection, a
Right.
human emotion.
Yeah, because that's how we're wired, right? We're wired to care about people. Yeah, that's when you guys both know my editing style. I'm like, if you don't lead with the person, I'm sending it right back.
That's so true. Every single time.
There's an interesting thing from cognitive psychologist Jerome Brunner, who kind of studied like how we learn, and he came to the conclusion that we're 22 times more likely to remember facts if it's tied to a story.
Right. Yeah.
And I want to add to this question as well. But first, before I get into like how I also engage in ways similar to Jenna, I want to uplift something she didn't mention. I think it's pretty cool that with a lot of the impactful stories she's written, like she's done door knocking. So like taking the article, printing it out, and door knocking, that's an organizing tactic, but I think it's also a really impactful way to get the news to people because not everyone knows about these publications, right? And they may not, technical jargon can still be in there, but when an article is written in a very plain way for people to understand, I think those are worth getting out to folks in very analog ways, so to speak. So I want to uplift that too. But I also go about things in a very curious way, showing up in the spaces, going to the community meetings, and I think I have a bit of privilege because I am a part of the communities, whether I'm directly impacted in a way of like asthma from like a plant that's, pervading the neighborhood with their toxic air, but more so being a Black and brown person in the spaces. I think within that, I still have to address my own privilege and bias, and I think as reporters, or just anyone with like a technical background or professional background, we still have to show up to these spaces first unpacking and knowing what those things are, decentering that, to then enter into the spaces with curiosity that focuses on like what we are trying to gather from the people that we are engaging with. So I like to go after the very passionate people in the meetings or the very humble people who are doing the work but don't share much about themselves, but you'll hear their name come up a lot, and just kind of like enter like into a more intimate conversation, and that's when people will just tell it all. And again, I think it's because I have a little bit of privilege there, but as soon as I tell folks like, yeah, I write, they'll tell me any and all the things, and I can't always like capture that in a story or like take the things, maybe I pass it on, but once they see that sort of genuine approach, they're more than willing to share more information.
Yeah, you enter the space as a human, basically, yeah. All right. Let's talk a little bit about the reporting. I asked if each of you could think of a story you worked on that you feel like actually has moved the needle on people's understanding of climate change or whatever environmental issue it was. Does anything stand out to any of you?
I missed that question, but I'm so glad I came with 2 examples.
I'm sure you do.
I think it was last year with the Canadian wildfires.
Yeah.
Nina and I collaborated on a story about how the air quality in Detroit was hazardous, and there weren't any alerts from the state or from the city health department about it. And I feel like because of our reporting, for the future days where the air quality was bad because of the wildfire smoke, they did send out alerts.
Yeah, they got their act together.
And that was like a month turnaround or a few weeks or whatever. So
Yeah.
I feel like that was impactful. And then I think another thing that comes to mind for me, recently Marathon Petroleum, their refinery in Detroit, they asked the state for a permit to lift their cap on how much they can produce, and that would increase greenhouse gas emissions and toxic pollutants in a primarily Black neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Yeah, in a primarily Black and low-income neighborhood. And we published a story about it, and I heard from a few people that they saw the story, and because of the story, they submitted comments to the state about the permit. And ultimately, the state approved the permit, but they did make 3 changes to the terms of it in response to those comments that they received. So I think that was kind of cool.
Yeah, that's kind of the holy grail. You motivated somebody to take action by reporting the facts. Yeah. Yeah.
I would point to a project I did a little while back about Michigan being a climate haven. It had been said before. It had been said about Duluth.
It's
first.
a narrative.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Climate-proof Duluth. We were determined to not write an article that just kind of functioned as a real estate tip sheet for the 1%. So we wanted to look at, like, what's this going to mean for Michigan and the Great Lakes region in terms of planning? What do we need to do now to be ready in 100 years when none of us are here anymore? And so that really resonated with our readers. I got more emails, more letters, more phone calls. We had more social media engagement, for whatever that's worth. We got invited to come speak at this college and present to this group, and I think it's because it doesn't really matter where you come down on the political spectrum. In Michigan, everybody loves the land here. We all love the environment to some degree, and you don't want to see it, destroyed, even by future generations, even if we're not going to be here ourselves. And that one really resonated. And I think it all started because I read a white paper that a scientist had written about a population movement based on U.S. Postal Service address changes, right? So instead of just writing a story about the white paper, I learned my lesson, and we went out and we interviewed people who had moved here. The one that shocked me the most was this couple that had moved from St. Louis, Missouri, and I have lived across the river from St. Louis, Missouri. It's hot and humid. August is miserable. And they went from that they moved to lawns on the shoreline of the Keweenaw Bay in the Upper Peninsula. And they loved it, and they're still there 2 years later. Yeah. They really are coming. The climate migrants really are coming. And it was lovely to have so much engagement with people from Michigan on that topic, to see people thinking that far ahead.
Cool. That's a cool one. I also have to read. I'm behind on your stories. I'm sorry.
There's a whole bunch.
Yeah, I know. Lisa, anything to add?
In June, I did a 2-part investigation looking into urban heat islands across the Great Lakes. So Milwaukee, Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Windsor, and Toronto. And
Oh, Windsor.
yep,
Yeah.
compared and contrast their short and long-term plans, because I'd read a white paper that was talking about how many northern cities, we have a different cultural orientation to heat. Yes, urban heat islands are a problem here, certainly, but we just don't think of heat as a problem here. We think of winter being the season that we need to be kind of worried about. And so it was really fascinating talking to the health departments and in these different cities and internationally to see, what are people doing in the short and long term. And I will say Milwaukee, of all of the US cities, is actually doing a lot. And it was kind of fascinating to see, advocacy groups here can take some of what's going on there or in Toronto, and how can we maybe tailor that to Detroit or Cleveland or even Chicago, which Chicago, that was kind of a mess, but that's a different story.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Anything you wanted to add, Yurkia?
Yeah, I think of 2 examples. And when I saw this question, I feel like I more so tackled it in a sense of thinking about impact based upon systemic racism within climate crises versus focusing on climate crises stories. I think of my very first story that I wrote about getting lead out of the soil. It focused on just unpacking how much land in Detroit in majority Black and brown neighborhoods have so much lead in the soil. And a big part of that is because of, when the city went through a heavy period of bankruptcy and financial crises of houses being burned down and demolished, wrongfully demolished, of the infill being filled incorrectly, and a lot of that led from these old houses being stuck in the soil still. So I alluded to that one because I don't know, a lot of conversation came from that. You know, people was not aware and they started to say things like, oh, that makes sense now. And, you know, curious about lead testing in their soil. As someone who's on the board at Keep Growing Detroit, I still like to advocate for that. Outside of like the climate things in a larger sense, I see like urban agriculture and food as that justice piece as well. So I'm always like telling people like, get that lead test. So that was one for me. Another one was a series, I think last year or the year before, that focused on Black and brown people in nature. And I think about that one as an impactful story within climate crises or systemic racism within climate crises is because a lot of the crises we're going through right now is because of systemic racism. And, you know, Black and brown communities have been affected for years by climate crises. And there's the myth that we don't, we're not interested in connecting to nature or seeing the importance of raising the issue when that's not the case. There are Black and brown folks who are out here and connecting to nature, and it's more than just addressing the issues in these very, I'll say, immediate ways now, and still taking the time out to find the joy and the peace in connecting to trees and nature and however you want to enjoy the outdoors. Which I think leads to greater action and awareness of the more vital things that we got to address. So those are the two pieces that I raised.
Yay, I got to edit both of those. Yes. They were great. All right. Anybody have any questions? All right, keep your questions in your head if you have any, and we'll move on to our next question.
We've been collecting them and do a shout out
okay.
for anyone who wants to ask a question. If they could raise their hand, we have people going around with notepads.
Oh, okay.
These are the questions that we have for the panel right now.
Okay, great. All right. This is a good question. All right. How do you go about encouraging people or people that you interview to tell their stories, especially when it's a difficult topic?
I have a tendency to get a little vulnerable myself
Yeah.
and explain why I care, why I'm there to talk to them about this issue. So, you know, you give a little to get a little. You got to build a trust. And so, not every reporter does that, though.
True.
Yeah, I think leaning into empowerment, in addition to what Sherry said, I think that vulnerability piece is important, and I lean on that too. But just encouraging them that, you know, this is to empower other folks. And a lot of times when we share our stories, there's at least one other person that can relate and can connect to this story. So again, thinking in my organizer brain of seeing it as a tool to mobilize people is how I like to encourage them. But also, you know, place pieces of care within like interviewing or having conversation with them. So asking questions that are rooted in care, or, you know, asking if we need to take a moment away from these questions just to be sure that they are okay and in their body, or may need some time away from what we're interviewing about, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I also think including other people that have a shared similar experience in the story can help a source feel better. Like if we're talking about like energy shutoffs or something, if they're not the only one in the story that has experienced an energy shutoff, and if they see the numbers and realize like this is like a systemic problem and it's just like unaffordable.
It's not my fault.
Yeah, it's not their fault, and I think it can make them feel more comfortable, like not being the focus of the whole story only being on them.
I think too, I think Nina once gave me advice that most interviews, like, it's the sweet spot is 20 minutes. Which
I do go stand. That's my rule of thumb.
That's been very helpful for me. But I think when it comes to a topic that's personal, I try to leave like a buffer for time, just because I don't like to go in right away with the sort of really personal stuff. I like to kind of like lay the groundwork first, and then kind of let them feel comfortable, and then kind of see how they're feeling throughout the interview before I get to maybe some questions that do deal with more personal things. So I kind of try to let them lead while also giving them like a buffer of time to feel comfortable while also not like taking 4 hours to do it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll also add, like, I think with people that are less familiar with the media, or if it is a really sensitive subject, you can take more time to like explain the process to them and go through their quotes with them or whatever.
Yeah, and I'd circle back to mention that specifically if I am talking to someone in an indigenous community, I will go out of my way and I will take a lot of time.
Right.
And I will email examples of stories I've written before so they can see what my work is like. I will meet in person. I will drive hundreds of miles to meet in person. I even learned a couple words in Anishinaabe. So, you know, you do the work, you build the trust.
Yeah, I think all of those are good. I think the only thing I would add is that I try to make it clear, like, what is going to come of this. If I don't think I'm going to end up using the interview, I try to be upfront because that may be somebody that I'm going to talk to later. If I'm pretty sure that this is something we're going to use, I go over the things with them again, and this is how I understand what you're saying. Do I have the facts right? Because the worst thing you want to do is misrepresent what somebody said. That's like,
You don't build trust that way.
no. All right. So I think we still have plenty of time for questions, and I do have a few of my own questions, but these questions are better, so I'm going to go with some of these. How do you encourage students and young journalists to choose the environmental beat, especially with it being so science forward and sometimes depressing? Do you encourage people?
Less depressing than the politics beat.
Thanks. True that.
I mean, I guess going off of that, like, it's also fun sometimes. Like, you had the waders on and you were in the...
I went 1,000 feet under a mountain 2 weeks ago to look at bats. I mean, come on. Bucket list item checked. That was great.
I went on a boat and I toured all these islands in the Detroit River that are like focusing on conservation. It's called the Conservation Crescent, and it's like the only international wildlife refuge in the world, I think.
Yeah?
And I'm about to write about this Canadian island that you can kayak to, where this whiskey baron used to live.
And it's
there's
okay to go
remains there.
over to...
Yeah, I'm gonna take a whole day and do that, so that's fun.
Oh, I can't wait for that story.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a fun job. Out of all the journalism jobs that are out there, this is probably the most fun. We get to go into the woods. We get to go out in boats. And we still get to do impactful things because maybe you've noticed that science has never been more important than right now. People having a basic understanding of science. I've discovered in my work that a lot of people really don't. So every little thing, every story we can tell that gives the public a little bit more grounding in the scientific method and, rationality.
But also, like, let's be real, not every story is going underground to see the bats, and sometimes we are reporting on things that are depressing and demoralizing, like, the incessant air pollution around Stellantis or other things. Well, how do you deal with staying positive or feeling like you're making a difference when it sometimes seems like there's just a lot?
I think, like, to what you were saying earlier, as like a tool of empowerment, like the energy and environmental beat is the least diverse beat in reporting. Less than 2% of environmental reporters and energy reporters are Black, but we know that environmental issues disproportionately impact Black communities. And so I specifically try to encourage young people of color to become environmental journalists because we need more of them to, tell the stories from their own communities. And I think that could be empowering for them to actually have this like huge platform and voice to tell the stories that are affecting their community.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I don't encounter a lot of young reporters a lot, but just for people in general, because I feel like anybody can be a journalist or reporter. Like, I got into this in very unconventional ways, but like whenever environmental climate crises things come up in conversation, I just ask those questions of curiosity, and then I end with like, well, how do you want to get the word out about this? Like, how do you see your role within like spreading this information or like sharing the passion or upset that you have in this moment? But I mean, especially for young reporters, I mean, I feel like Gen Z, they're cool. They can do things in fun, creative ways that we haven't thought about. So like, just encouraging them to like, yeah, I'm a fan of Gen Z. But yeah, just encouraging them to like insert that creativity is key as well, because it doesn't have to be all, I mean, it is very serious. I feel like just about all of reporting in today's climate is very serious, but yeah, just trying to find that balance of inserting the joy in the work, but also seeing the importance of wanting to get the word out. Like Jenna said, there's not a lot of Black and brown people in environmental reporting, even though it mostly affects us. So like that's a good thing to uplift as well in those conversations.
And it is true that sometimes we have to tell grim stories. They aren't all fun stories about wood turtles and little brown bats. But we have to take the time to tell the grim stories too, because they matter as well. Thanks. I wish that hope would solve the climate crisis, but hope is not going to solve the climate crisis. And sometimes you have to point out the grim realities to inspire action.
Getting a lot of questions. Go on.
Oh, I mean, I'm kind of interested to hear what these other questions are. Everyone said great responses, but you've got a lot of questions over there.
Oh my gosh. Okay. All right. Well, here, this is a good one for our panel. Some have claimed that women are leading the climate movement. In your experience, is this the case? Let's just answer that part. Do we think that's the case? I don't know.
There sure are an awful lot of women around.
Yeah.
That's all right.
All right. So why do we think that is, and how can we expand the audience for the climate movement? To men, I guess, or?
I think I did read that women are like, I read something about that. I don't remember.
Maybe there are.
It's not something I really thought about, but I did a story about people displaced by extreme weather events like wildfires out west, and it's like women are better organizers, I think I read. So I don't know if that's helpful.
Well, we're all women. I think we're mostly a majority up here, so what the hell. All right. There's so many.
Expand the audience. I don't know. I'm not going to answer that question.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that. I mean, you have like a full woman presenting panel up here, and I feel like that's hard to answer without any men present. But I think by nature we are very nurturing people, so we just like organically connect to wanting to lean into environmental justice work. But I don't know. I don't know if that's a question of understanding how like institutions are ran, or like what are the opportunities for men to be in those spaces that are making an impact in environmental work. I don't know. I don't know what that looks like. But you know, there are a far and few guys out here who are doing this work. But I mean, women are dominating that. But maybe it's because of our nurturing tendencies. Who knows?
I guess like when looking at for sources, like scientists and experts, I have noticed like in the last 4 years that there maybe are more femme presenting
Women
scientists.
scientists.
Yeah,
Okay.
which has been a nice change in terms of looking for expert sources. It did kind of feel like there was a period of time where that was a little bit harder to find.
I do think connecting environmental issues to recreation is a really good way to expand the audience. Grist had an article about how it's getting harder to make a home run in baseball because of climate change.
Really?
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. And one of my favorite facts is that Ducks Unlimited, the like hunting,
Yeah. Duck hunting?
yeah, they're one of the biggest funders of conservation in the country. And it's because of duck hunters that want to preserve the wetlands so that they can hunt ducks. So I think that's an interesting way to tap into like different communities and people to bring them into the conversation.
I think especially in Michigan, because we have the urban population that's centered around Detroit and Grand Rapids, but then we also have this massive population in the rest of the state that really cares about the land and is really into hunting. And I think, I think the activists have figured out, and I think, as far as journalists too, we're figuring it out that that's one way to interest an audience that might not care about the birds in the same way, but they care about shooting them, I guess. All right. How can we reach audiences who are noticing that climate change is happening but might not call it climate change because they are Republicans or climate deniers? There's a key group in Michigan, for example, this person cites farmers. I guess we were just kind of talking about that a little bit. Is that a group that, people see changes, we all see changes, but, sort of still in denial?
Yeah, there's a whole segment of people in Michigan who are very much in pursuit of solar farm expansion, and you can't talk about climate change with them because they don't believe it's real. But they very much believe that the revenues that they can earn from solar energy are real. So there are some circles that you have to edit the way you talk to them. Not necessarily journalists. I'll still ask about climate change, and if you don't believe in it, I'll make sure they know. But yeah, it's tough. Some people won't acknowledge reality.
We had a segment that we did on ice fishing, and that was definitely, when looking for sources for that, that was an issue that we had. I think it's really important to meet people where they're at when you're interviewing them, but also, like I think Nina was saying, like letting people know what the story is about to build that trust, while also being super rigorous with our fact checking. So we're including stories, but we're also including the facts that are there as well.
Yeah, and I guess that's one thing I'll bring up as a question, because I think it speaks to a lot of the work we do. We've been accused on some of our stories of having too much of an advocacy perspective. And so how do we, and this is something that Rukia deals with a lot because you're sort of really riding the line between the two. What is the difference in climate journalism in terms of advocacy and journalism? And how do we maintain a journalistic ethic while reporting on something that is certainly, has a lot of advocacy around it, and I think probably, we really feel needs attention?
I think it's a matter of reporting a story in a very well-rounded way. So maybe presenting both sides of things. So why do people feel like climate crises don't exist versus the people who are very much so experiencing them? And how can you marry the two in this story to lead the reader towards some sort of action or sense of curiosity to like understand on their own, the importance of the sort of advocacy piece of it, or just like the bigger picture of the concern is what I lean into. And thinking about the question from the note card regarding addressing people who don't feel that climate crisis exists, it's a matter of, instead of like trying to reword it, but instead leading into questions of asking like, how do you think climate has changed over the years? Why do you think that is? What are you noticing? And, through them answering that, it's not a matter of saying, aha, this is exactly what it is, but like taking that perspective, adding other perspectives to reach a conclusion that allows the reader to like reach their own conclusion or understanding, if that makes sense.
I think I have to say that if you're a climate journalist, you are kind of an advocacy journalist, right? Because as a climate journalist, you're advocating for the planet and for everything that lives on it. I've never felt more like the Lorax in my life than after getting this job. When they, in my job interview, they asked me about climate deniers, and I said that I won't quote them. I won't platform climate deniers. We don't have time for that. So, yeah, I
Yeah.
That's where I come down on it. I don't have time for the deniers.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say with, when we started Planet Detroit, we kind of wrote up a platform and kind of a manifesto, and it's like, we hold these things to be true. Climate change is real, it's disproportionately impacting people of color, and humans are causing it. And those are not negotiable for us, and we're not gonna quote somebody that, is questioning, because there's just too much evidence that those things are true.
Yeah, about a year and a half ago, I was at a Michigan Press Association conference, and I was on a panel. And a young man, I don't know if he was a journalist or maybe a lawyer, I'm not sure, but he asked me a question about my perspective on covering climate change. And he said, well, what if you're wrong? And man, he stumped me. I didn't answer that question very well at that moment, but I thought about it for a long time. If we're wrong, I'll do better then. And in the meantime, people who are much smarter than me have been telling us that climate change disproportionately affects poor people and people of color, and I refuse to be the conduit for additional harm. You're not going to do that through me.
I think it's also less about advocacy and the need to call for accountability. Like we've all said up here, like it's very real, right? But it's also a matter of acknowledging the power players who are perpetuating it, right? So I feel like a lot of the stories that any of us have written about centers and calls out the entities that are causing the harm on a community. So I see that less as like advocacy and the need to call for accountability. And if folks see that as a fine line, then I think that, I don't know, that's a harmful thing that needs to be unpacked more, because journalism should not serve as a tool for complacency, and that's exactly what that would be.
Right. Right. Yeah. Anybody else have anything to add to that discussion? No? Okay, all right. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left. I'm going to ask one more of these audience questions unless there's more, and then I have a closing question I want to ask. Oh my God, all right.
This is just a comment,
Oh.
actually, and it's really nice.
Oh, yay. Yes, thank you. Okay. The question is, I feel like climate reporters do a good job of educating readers that the climate is changing now, but not necessarily that today's climate impacts will keep getting worse year after year. I guess there's no question here, but does that ring true to you? And if so, like what do we need to be doing to help people understand like the future?
I don't know. I just wrote an article about extreme heat and how half of Detroit schools don't have air conditioners. And so the city's plan is to do an early release for all of the schools, even if they have an air conditioner, on heat index days that are above 90 degrees. And in there we had data that 90-degree days are going to quadruple over the next like 10 years in Michigan.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm very, like, this is getting worse by the year in a lot of my reporting.
Yeah.
I think it's just drive down on the local. Point out how the schools are going to have to let out early. Point out which endangered species are going to go extinct. Point out which neighborhoods are going to flood.
Which streams you're not going to be able to fish in anymore.
Yeah. Which parts of the nation are going to start demanding our water.
Yeah.
You got to drill down on the local. Don't get me wrong, what the New York Times does, what the Washington Post does, what the AP does is wonderful, and we need them, and they cover the big stories, the big worldwide stories. But it's up to us to drill it home to the people living their everyday lives. And sometimes we can convince people who don't necessarily believe in climate change that something's happening, because we show them something's happening local, that they've observed and they've seen it. And if that's all I can do, I'll take that win.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, I think the climate or the wildfires of last summer just were a turning point for a lot of people. It was evidence that this is impacting us locally, and people who weren't talking about it suddenly were talking about it. So
People could literally see it in front of their face
and
for the
breathe it
first
and
time.
smell it and have to be inside because of it.
Yeah, I'd say I don't know. I definitely see like reporting alluding to what's to come in the future for climate crises, especially when you look at hyperlocal reporting. Because I mean, within that reporting, you're looking at Black and brown communities who have been facing these things for years. And we could look at the record flood in Detroit, for example, as one of those things, and how infrastructure failure is now affecting them and what it could look like for the future. So I think a lot of these climate reporting stories is stating things in a way that is rooted in more of that proactivity. And I think if you like focus on reporting that alludes to the future, where you know, you can't like produce a lot of factual data within that, and you can add storytelling, but it's going to be in this very like panicky sort of way. I think it's just a matter of like paying attention to what's already being reported, seeing the immediacy in that, and acting, being aware, and changing the course of action based off of what's presented versus like, I don't know, what we already do as a society, which is working this very reactive way.
Yeah, I think too, the other thing is that, I mean, of course, it's important to talk about what's going to happen in the future. Sometimes I think maybe it feels implied when you're writing about certain climate things or environmental crises, but we're tasked with writing about what's happening now and in this moment. And so we have to be really rooted in this place and time. And while, yes, we have to be thinking about what's going to happen in the future, sometimes I think that overly thinking about the future makes it so overwhelming that it's hard to be really rooted in this place and time now to feel like there are actionable things to do. So I think there's kind of like this balance in the writing and the reporting that we're doing where, yes, we're talking about the future, but we're also talking about what's going on right now in this moment.
All right, this is our last question. I'm going to take an audience question because it's better than mine. What emerging trends do you see in your climate beat? What are you going to be writing about, or what are they going to be reading about in the next 2 years that's on your radar now?
Ooh, I can kick this one off.
All right.
So I love to see that there are solutions already happening in neighborhoods when it comes to self-sufficiency or remediating climate issues that are going on in neighborhoods, right? So in the next 2 years, I look forward to reporting more on neighborhood solutions to climate issues versus focusing on the issues. Because, I mean, I can see that we're moving into a state of the world where we have to rely on each other, like turn into our neighbors, turn into friends and family to come up with solutions, because the corporations and large entities are going to continue to perpetuate harm within the climate. So I'm looking forward to reporting more on what folks are doing on a hyper-local level to, I guess, solve that with their neighbors as a way to find solutions locally.
Sorry. Well, at Great Lakes Now, I think certainly we're going to be talking a lot in the next few years about how winters are changing, lack of ice, more rain events, more increased flooding events. I think that's definitely on the docket for what we're going to be reporting on a lot the next few years.
I think also flooding in Detroit and extreme heat days and just how they impact everything from decreased students learning and unhoused individuals and increased gun violence and just the fact that like many Detroiters don't have air conditioners. And I think like DTE and power with increased severe weather events and just how bad the reliability is in Detroit and the continual like rate increases. I think that's gonna hit an edge soon. And I think just statewide, probably the impacts of climate change on farming. I like that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of impacts on farming, and I don't see a lot of cover. I mean, there is, but I think it's being undercovered. I agree.
And Michigan has the second most diverse agricultural system in the country.
Yeah.
California only wins because they've got so much more land.
It's getting dry in California. I don't know.
I think the story's energy. I think it's going to be all about where we get our energy and how we use it, because both of those things are changing pretty rapidly right now. The phenomenon of data centers being built
Yep, I was going to bring that up if nobody else did.
and using copious amounts of energy and water, both. I don't need all this AI. I get annoyed when Google turns to AI when I search something. I don't want that. It's adding to my footprint and I don't like it. But we're not just facing a climate crisis. We're also facing an energy crisis. And they intersect right across our faces. And if we don't figure out where we're going to get all this energy or more efficient ways to use it, we're going to be in real trouble. I've been covering the fact that they're considering turning the Palisades nuclear plant back on. They're considering turning
3 Mile Island.
a unit at 3 Mile
Microsoft
Island.
wants 3 Mile Island back on.
Yep.
Yeah.
Microsoft bought that contract just this last week. So we're talking about turning on legacy nuclear facilities. To me, that's it. The best energy out there is the energy that we don't use. So we need to have real thoughtful conversations about how we use energy and where we're going to get it from, because it's running out.
Yeah, I guess I'll just expand a little bit. I think I see two freight trains kind of coming at each other. One is, this desire to decarbonize and reduce emissions and increase renewables. And the other are like these two huge markets for electricity that are opening up. And one is, electric vehicles, another electrification, and the other is AI. And I guess, I'm only kind of really starting to come to the party to understand what that means. And I don't know if everybody saw today's news about the Michigan legislature passing a law that is going to give data centers tax incentives potentially in Michigan, but this is another major, energy suck that's coming and a huge source. And so how are we going to meet our climate goals and accommodate, these things? It's just turning into a bit of a chicken and egg thing here. So I think that's what we'll be covering. And again, how do those impact local communities? How do those issues impact local communities in terms of the jobs, in terms of, having this infrastructure in their communities? What does that look like? So that's what I think. Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for this panel. Thank you for listening in. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for such wonderful questions.
Yeah, I'm going to
Great
take these back
questions.
and see if I can answer some more. All right, we're done. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Rukia.